Cold Feet by Waddell. Richard held the foot before him at arm's length, his thumb and first finger gripping the top of the grey sock, so that the foot below swung slowly round. It was undoubtedly a foot, although in an advanced state of decomposition, so that the fluids it secreted had stained and soiled the ordinary grey sock it was in. Richard held it up with a good deal of care, fearful that the fabric of the sock might give way. Then he lowered it onto the table before him, there to consider it in all its aspects. He sniffed it, then he prodded it with his thumb. Then he sniffed his thumb before wiping his hand carefully with his handkerchief. It might look like a grey sock full of... Have you ever cleaned out a blocked drain? That's what it looked like, soft and oozy, yet with a certain substance to it, a shape where the flesh had rotted into the wool. Or had the wool rotted into the flesh? It might look like a sock full of oozing mud and bone, but he felt reasonably sure that it was, in fact, a foot. Whose foot? It's a reasonable question, but Richard didn't know the answer. Apart from the tab on the sock, numbered in purple ink, tankard/free/9J, there was nothing to distinguish it from any other decaying foot you might find around the place. Was it a foot of distinction? The foot of a gentleman? Or the foot of a road mender? A chorus girl? It did not look like a girl's foot. It was a big foot. I say was, but I mean had been, for it wasn't big any longer. But the sock was a big one, and presumably the foot inside had originally fitted it before. But there's no need to go into unpleasant details, is there? It was a mystery, an enigma, and Richard sat with the decaying foot in a soup plate in front of him as he ate his supper, now and then absently prodding it with his fork to see how sound it was. His meal finished, he made himself a nice cup of tea, read a chapter of Proust. He had a plan for Proust, and was working his way through a set amount each day, cleaned up his things, and returned to the foot. It had dripped a little over the edge of the soup plate and made an unpleasant-looking stain on the tablecloth. But that couldn't be helped. A soft, squelchy foot is a difficult thing to fit into a soup plate. Try it sometime. He carried the soup plate across to the telephone table, settled down on his new blue sofa beside it, and rang up his friend Emma. "Hello, Em," he said. "Guess what?" "What?" she said. You may as well know at this point that Richard had a very low opinion of Emma, not entirely based on fact. Emma, in his opinion, was not bright. Richard, in his opinion, was. He had met her at the Hammersmith Pally one St. Patrick's night, and noted the distinction at once, with the result that he thought he'd been exploiting Emma ever since. Some of the things Emma did her mother wouldn't have believed in, let alone approved of. But she got along quite nicely, thank you, with the aid of several suitors, one of whom was Richard. Emma's mother certainly wouldn't have thought him suitable, for he was known all over Acton for not doing the sort of things Emma's mother thought Emma should do, only Emma didn't, if you see what I mean. What I'm getting at is that knowing Richard was no skin off Emma's nose. And her mother did very nicely out of it too, though she thought Emma worked in a banana factory. "I got something for you, Em," Richard said, idly squeezing the foot. "Ooh!" gurgled Emma in delight. "A surprise," said Richard. "You'll never guess." "Actually, Emma was never much concerned with guessing. It was valuing that took up her time. The important thing about a gift, to Emma's mind, was what she could get for it. It was her proud boast that she could get something for anything. "It'll put our relationship on a new footing," said Richard. He was a lad, was Richard. "Oh, Rich," said Emma, "you shouldn't have." Now, although Emma didn't know it, this was basically very realistic of her. Richard shouldn't have brought the food home. He should have left it where he found it in the tea urn, or else he should have taken it to the management and complained. "This tea tastes of old feet." Goodness knows he'd said that often enough, but right up until the moment he actually found the food, he'd never imagined that there really was one in there, slowly decaying among the tea leaves. With any normal good fortune, the food would have been thrown out one day when the urn was cleaned, and no one would have known the difference. But the old grey sock had somehow become entangled round the heat regulator, and there the food had hung, for all the world like a tea bag, adding its own distinctive flavour to each cup. "You coming over then?" Richard inquired seductively. "I can hardly wait," said Emma, and she couldn't either, because her mother had been drinking the grocery money again. She rushed to the bathroom, took out her teeth and cleaned them, gurgled at herself. She was a funny girl. She liked gurgling. Put her teeth back in. Hitched up her tights. She wore those green ones with the silver bell decorations. Tugged on her snakeskin boots and fairly bounced down the stairs to the front door and out through it to the bus stop, where she had to wait half an hour for a 31. As for Richard at the other end of the line, he wasn't in a good mood at all, which was a pity, because when he'd put down the phone after calling Em up, he'd been feeling quite full of himself. "Put our relationship on a new footing," he said to himself, smugly smiling into the sitting room mirror and thinking what a catch old Em had got herself. But his happiness didn't last. He was standing by the mirror combing his hair into flounces. He liked flounces. They went with his image. When his elbow caught the soup plate, and over it went, foot and all, making a great big slimy ooze stain all down the side of his trousers. I don't know if you've ever tried sponging decayed foot and tea leaves off your cavalry twills while your lady friend is on the way over. He wasn't to know about the 31, but you can take it from me that decayed foot doesn't sponge off all that easily. It's like grease, only worse. More like cat food left to fester in a tin, then mixed briskly with cobweb. Only not quite like that either. If you're very particular about it and want to know for yourself, you can always ask your friends if they've got a foot they can spare, or you might even find one rotten somewhere one day as Richard did. Though, admittedly, a tea urn isn't the most logical place in the world to look for one. A tea urn not being a logical place to look for a foot, even though the tea in Richard's did taste as though a foot had been dripping into it. Well, oozing into it. A tea urn not being the place you'd normally expect to find a foot is probably the reason why it got left there. Probably the person who put it there had every intention of coming back for it, but forgot where it was hidden and simply couldn't find it again. It may even have been put in there for a joke. You give some people a foot and they'll take a mile. Or someone may have put it there out of malice, thinking the manageress would shout out, "Hey, there's a foot in my tea," and the lady with the trolley would get the sack. Not that she didn't deserve the sack. She should have cleaned her urn more thoroughly, right up inside, instead of just taking out the little tea leaves tray at the bottom. But on the whole, I think it more likely that somebody was quite innocently taking the foot home. Maybe it was a souvenir of his operation, and absent-mindedly put it inside the urn, pro tem, to keep it cool, or hot, depending on the season. And we don't know the season for the simple reason that Richard had no way of telling how long the foot had been in there before he found it, though he might have been able to work out how long the tea had tasted of rotten foot. But he didn't bother. What we do know for certain is that Richard found the foot which had somehow got into the urn and was flavouring the tea. Instead of doing the proper thing with it, complaining, or putting it back in the urn and keeping his mouth shut, he put it inside his cardigan and walked stiffly back to his office, where he slopped it into his briefcase, because he thought it would make a splendid and unusual present for Em. This was one of the recurring problems about Emma, because she was making a living out of it. She encouraged people to give her presents, but as she sold them all, she always needed more. Her boyfriends naturally thought she had everything and had to go to a great deal of trouble to come up with something new and original, which expressed their personalities. The foot seemed the perfect answer, and Richard congratulated himself on his shrewdness as he came home on the district line that night. What if it had smeared his shirt? If it was even now slopping around in his briefcase, slithering around his library book? It was unusual. It would show her what a lad he was. No one else could possibly have given her a foot. It was bound to come in handy, the very phrase he used, which shows you again how bright Richard was. Footloose and fancy. But that's unpardonable. It would be a surprise, a novelty, wouldn't it? A necklace of teeth, yes. A hairpiece, yes. Maybe even a purse made out of an ear. They have 'em. It's for sophisticates living it up in Canonbury. But they do. But has anyone ever given you a foot? It's not a practical gift. What can you do with it? A foot in the door, I suppose. Or you could make it into a lamp or wire it up as a telephone receiver. But that's while your foot is firm. And Richard's foot wasn't firm. Richard's foot had been in the tea urn goodness knows how long, and it showed. "Hello, Em," Richard said when he opened the door. "Hello, Rich," she said. "What's a foot then?" He could have said, "It's a wet slimy thing in a grey sock that gets right into the fabric of your carpet," but he didn't. He caught her in a passionate embrace, and there wasn't any sensible dialogue that bears reporting for a long time. "I got you a present, Em," he said when they were having their cups of cocoa. Despite being a bit of a lad and a personality, Richard was basically conservative. Cocoa was good enough for his dad, and it was good enough for him. It builds you up, Cocoa. "You shouldn't have," said Emma unconvincingly. She should have thought up something new to say, but she hadn't bothered. You're better to stick to the things you know. She was basically conservative too, which is probably why she got on so well with Richard. "Close your eyes, Em," he said. "Oh no, I couldn't," she said, blushing prettily, though it was a bit late for that really. "Go on, Em," Richard said. "All right then, Rich," she said, "I will." Emma closed her eyes and sat there hopefully, and something cold and soft was placed in her lap. "You can open your eyes, Em," said Richard. "What is it, Rich?" she said, looking at the gaily wrapped parcel on her lap. "You really shouldn't have, you know." "Open it, Em," said Richard proudly. Emma untied the pretty blue ribbon with fluttering fingers, tore back the paper and looked at the foot, most of which Richard had got back inside the sock after he'd scraped it off the carpet. "It's lovely, Rich," she said mechanically. "It's a foot," he said expectantly. "Oh-hoo," said Emma. "A foot. You shouldn't have." "I did though, didn't I?" "A foot," said Emma thoughtfully. "I don't think I've ever had a foot before." "Don't be silly, Em," said Richard. "You've got two already." "I know," she said, "but this one's special, isn't it?" "Course," he said. "I wouldn't have given it to you else, would I, Em?" They both sat and looked at the foot, which, freed of its protective wrapping, was beginning to ooze out of the sock again. "Rich," said Em, "what does it do?" "It doesn't do anything, Em," said Richard. "It's a foot." "What do you do with a foot, Rich?" she said. "Walk on it," said Richard, a little impatiently. Emma looked at it for a moment. "I don't think I'd like to do that, Rich," she said. "It would get all over my shoes." "You could put it up before the fire," said Richard, warming to his subject. "Could you?" said Emma. "Or put it in a slipper," he said. "You could get it a whole range of shoes to show it off." It's unique, Em. You're the only girl in London with 3 feet. Think of that. I am, said Em, perhaps a little bitterly. She didn't even know where you went to sell a foot, let alone what you were supposed to get for it. The ordinary presents people gave her, jewellery, furs, pretty little things from the Portobello Road. She could dispose of them without so much as a moment's thought. But a foot, and a pretty dodgy looking foot too, she thought to herself. Now what do you do with a foot? A butcher? No. A taxidermist? Even if it could be stuffed, then what? And stuffing costs money. A hospital for students to study. That seemed a good idea. Thank you ever so, Rich, said Emma, rewrapping the foot, a puzzled frown on her brow. Emma didn't show the foot to her mother when she got home. Her mother might have wanted her to keep it, like the golden brooch or the silver fox fur, and Emma didn't really fancy the foot. She agreed with Richard that it was an unusual gift, which expressed his personality, but she still didn't want it lying round the house gathering dust. Basically it was an old smelly foot, and she wanted rid of it. Right, you may say. Put it in the bin, or burn it. She couldn't burn it. Her house in Acton had oil-fired central heating, but she could have put it in the bin. You might even say she should have put it in the bin, just as Richard should have left it in the tea urn, but she didn't. She was a hard-working girl, and she had a living to earn, just like anybody else. And the way she earned her living was by getting a price for anything. Anything, no matter what. She had one left foot in a grey sock, so she was going to sell it. Somebody somewhere wanted a left foot. Of that she was sure. How much will you give me? She said, plumping it down on Mr. Blackburn's counter. It made a horrid little sucky noise, but luckily he didn't seem to notice. What for? He said. That, she said, prodding the foot. It's not a bad sock, he said. How many more have you got, dear? There's only one, she said. One pair of socks, he said. You can't come pestering me with that. If I went round buying single pairs of socks like that, I'd soon be out of business. It's not a pair, she said. Just the left one. One sock, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Not one sock, Emma said. One... But it was no use. Mr. Blackburn had gone to his little room at the back, where he was counting army surplus vests. Sadly, Emma picked up her foot and left. Somebody somewhere must want a left foot. She didn't like to go in through the main gate of the hospital, so she went round the side and bumped into ever such a nice young man who was pushing a wicker basket. I wonder if you could direct me, Emma began. Any time, he said saucily. They went for a coffee in a little place he knew, down the road. Emma knew it too, but she didn't say so. She was trying to work her way round to introducing the foot, which lay all damp and clammy inside her shopping bag. Rex, she said. The young man's name was Rex. Do they buy, you know, bits of people up at the hospital? How do you mean? He said cautiously. Well, Emma said, supposing a person had a bit of a person to sell, would they buy it? All depends, Rex said. A left foot? Said Emma hopefully. I don't know about that, Rex said. Feet aren't much in my line. I'm more a body man myself. He said it with a sort of leer, but luckily Emma wasn't taking any notice. She was too concerned about the foot getting onto the butter in her bag. Do you think you could find out for me? She said. Come around to my place and I'll look it up, he said. So they went back to Rex's, and a long time later he actually did look it up, or at least poor Emma thought he was looking it up. But actually the little grey book he thumbed through was Caesar's Gallic Wars 3. What's it say, Rexy? She said, hitching up her tights. They were always getting bunched round her middle, those tights, which came of having short legs and a big behind she called her disaster. But that's by the by. Emma never could get a pair of green tights to fit her. "You really want to sell your feet?" said Rexy. It was Rexy now, not Rex, who was really quite an ordinary hospital porter, and found the whole thing a little difficult to grasp. "Not my feet," she said, "just my foot." "Ha ha ha," said Rex, thinking what a funny little thing she was. "I should hang on to it if I were you. Wait till you get a pair." "I got one too many," said Emma, ungrammatically, but not without a certain charm. "You look a bit of all right to me," Rexy said wittily. "And your feet do too," he added, as an afterthought. So far as he could see, there was nothing at all the matter with Emma's feet, of which she had only two, despite her protestations to the contrary. "If only I had a pair," she said sadly. "Hello, Em," said Richard, when called to the office phone that afternoon. "How's tricks?" "Listen, Rich," she said, "you know my foot?" "Yes, Em," he said. "You know feet, Rich? They come in pairs, don't they? Two of them." "Not always, Em," said Richard, guessing the way the conversation was going. "Oh, Rich," she said, heavy breathing, and paused. "I would so love to have the other one." "Well, you'll get it for me, won't you, Rich? Promise?" "Well, I do fancy you, Rich. Honest I do. Well, and I love my foot, Rich. You see, please, Rich. I'd like to get you the right one too, honest I would, but..." "Woohoo! Rich, you are a love," said Emma, and quickly put down the receiver. What a dilemma. Emma, thought Rich. He was a lad, remember? He sat at his desk, his fingers pensively flipping through his invoices, his mind elsewhere. Em wasn't really being unreasonable. Feet do come in pairs. One left foot was no use to anybody. But where was the other one? So greatly perturbed was he that he had almost finished his tea before he realized that it tasted of old feet. It was the work of a moment to walk to the door, stroll down the corridor, peer furtively round the door of the kitchen, step inside, remove the top of the urn and reach down inside it, where his groping fingers found the second rotten sock, complete with foot. This one, he noted with interest, still had toenails, though they had been discoloured by the tannin. A happy ending? That's what Richard thought. He sent the foot to Emma special delivery, and she put it in the shopping bag with the first one and carried them both to a man she knew in an antique shop. "Do you buy feet?" she said. "If the price is right," he said mechanically. She put her 2 feet on the counter. "Ugh!" he exclaimed, quite naturally. "Take them away." She looked hurt, and Emma could look very pretty when she was hurt. "Apart from anything else," he said, to soften the blow, "you'll agree that they're in very bad condition and..." He peered closer. "And they're not even a pair." "Of course they're a pair," Emma said, but they weren't. She had 2 left feet. Or rather, 3 left feet, and 1 right one. But the pair were her own. "Hello, Em," said Richard, when called to the office phone the following morning. "How's tricks?" Meanwhile, in the tea urn, 2 right feet were brewing very nicely, thank you.